All right, hello, my name is Josh Alexander, and this is Painting with Words, Writing Poems. I have some participants with me today, and I'll start everyone introducing themselves with Lauren.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Davila. I am a Latinx writer. I write short fiction, long fiction, and poetry as well, which we're talking about today. I have a few books in the works in terms of specific short story anthologies, and I've published multiple in multiple different literary magazines and online journals in terms of my poetry. And I know we'll chat a little bit about some specifics at the end of the panel here.
And then Yulu.
Hi everyone, I'm Yulu. Nice to meet you all. I am I'm Coast Miwok in Pomo for those who don't know me. So Yulu Ewis means angry basket in Miwok. It is my tribal name. I have a book that just came out, a poetry book called Ope, which means more in our language. It won an award, and I'm working on a couple novels at the moment. And I guess we'll get more into that later.
All right, and finally Jenise.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jenise Michele. I am originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I grew my poetry down in Southern California. Now I'm currently in Northern California. I have two books of poetry that are self-published. The one you see here is Brave, and I have one that is ready for release called Whoa. I like to write about my feelings, and they're very deep and very heavy. So that's primarily what my poetry deals with. Nice to meet you all.
All right, cool. So, obviously the panel's about poetry, so we'll just jump right in with the first question, which I guess is two questions back to back kind of. And we can go ahead and just answer in the same order with Lauren, Yulu, then Jenise, or if anyone wants to jump in, they feel like they have something super important to say and spring off with someone else. So first question is, what do you love about poetry? And the follow-up, why is it such a powerful medium, do you think?
Yeah, for me, I've always loved poetry from a very young age. Like when I was very, very young, like my mom specifically like introduced me to like very traditional, like classic poetry. Like it was one of the first books that I was looking at in terms of like, like nursery rhymes and kind of things like that. And I always just loved the, sort of as Jenise said, like how emotion heavy poetry is. When we look at fiction, like it can get bogged down sometimes with like characters and plot and a bunch of other things, and poetry you're able to just sort of put it out there in a way that's very authentic and like upfront right on the page. So yeah, for me, I think it's a lot tied to emotion.
How about you, Yulu? What do you think?
Well, I started reading poetry. I think that was the very first thing I ever read was a poem, and it was Halfway Up the Stairs by A.A. Milne, who wrote Winnie the Pooh. And ever since then, I was just hooked. It's I think it's powerful because you can just say what you want to say in such a short amount of time. You don't have to, like Lauren said about prose, you have to get bogged down by painting a story and getting, starting from here to get to there. And poetry, you just kind of like, you can just write what you feel and what you want, like right there. And so my favorite medium I use is epic poetry. I like to tell a story through my writing.
I agree about, the same things you were saying with it. You don't have to do the character building and the world building. You kind of can get to the heart of the matter. And that's what I really love. I love that you both mentioned how you got into poetry from a very young age. And for me, I really got into it with lyrics, with like songs and with rap. And that was more of how I kind of got into poetry. And I remember in class, we read the lyrics to I Am a Rock, I Am an Island. And I always remember the ending, and a rock feels no pain and an island never cries. And that just felt so deep and so poetic. And so I kind of I love that there can be flow and there can be rhythm to poetry, and that poetry shows up in different mediums.
Cool. And it seems like everyone mostly jumped ahead to the second question and answered what they feel poetry can accomplish other formats can't. So I'll go ahead and skip that one for now because I feel like we pretty much covered it. So the next one is, what sort of things typically inspire your poetry?
Yeah. For me, I read a lot of ekphrastic poetry, so poetry inspired by something else. So for me, it's a lot of time like an image or a photo that I'll come across, like a piece of art, but also, we live in a very current age, so like I'm very inspired also too by pop culture, so like songs or TV shows or movies, something that's you can sort of access, I guess. In terms of culture, like it's something that's easily accessible, but the emotional pull is what really brings it in. So definitely inspired by a lot, definitely.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Yulu.
It's okay. I just want to make sure she was done before I jumped in. Um, for me, when I first started writing poetry, it was inspired by just emotion. So I just kind of wrote based on what I had read. But I took a post-colonial literature class in college, and I read Joy Harjo, which is a pretty famous Native American poet. And I didn't realize that you can use poetry as a way to activate for your causes. And that's what most of my stuff is now, is about my culture, my causes, the politics. It's about my voice. So when I feel silence, that's when I usually will start writing.
Yeah, and to just kind of piggyback on what Yuli was saying, my writing is inspired by just what I'm going through. It's mostly journal entries that I choose to share with people and that I write in this particular way. I grew up in a childhood and an environment where I could not express my feelings. I could not express my emotions, and I have a lot of them. And so that's where poetry comes in and came in for me. It's just being able to take all of these things that are inside of me and bring them out. And also to Lauren's point, pop culture, social, political issues, things that are going on in our society, being able to write about that, but also put my personal experiences with it and marry it together and be able to share that with other people. So that's what it's like.
Cool. Well, I feel like the transition to the next question I have here might work better if I just ask both of the next two at once, because they're both kind of technical questions. So if each of you could kind of speak to structural and word choice. So the specific questions I have are, how do you decide your word choice or descriptions for your poetry? And do you follow any certain structures, or do you usually just kind of do free form poems?
So for me, and I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but like I like accessibility in my personal writing and my literature. So in terms of the word choice, it's definitely not something that, I'm like looking into a dictionary for, or like trying to find, the specific word, like for me, because it is so tied to emotion, as I think we all are figuring out that we have here. It sort of flows right away. And most of my poetry, I sort of go based off of that sort of first draft rather than parsing it through like line by line and picking at it over and over again. And I guess that kind of leads into it. Yeah, I'm free verse poems all the way. Like every once in a while I'll dabble into like a villanelle or a sonnet, but yeah, definitely not doing anything very like structural by any means. Definitely free verse, definitely not rhyming. Yeah, just feeling it.
Okay, Yulu, how about you?
Well, when I first started out writing poetry, everything was, free verse and no form, because I didn't like the constraints of having to follow like dictation and all that stuff. Um, then I got my MFA in creative writing, and they forced me to have to write, you know, in certain forms. And I kind of made my poetry more succinct. So piggybacking off of what was said earlier in regards to music and rap, I have a lot of friends that write lyrics, and so they needed someone to help them write bars, and so I would help them, and it actually started helping me, which made my writing more succinct. And now I kind of write in that type of form where I'm doing the, the doubles. But other than that, it's still pretty much free form because I don't follow the dictation rules or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm also all about free form. Again, it's kind of journal entry for me. So it's kind of just like writing it out. Like I'll write a poem in a paragraph and then go back and edit it. I can't really get into structure like similar to Lauren. I've tried different styles and I have different things, but I like the freedom of free form because I just feel like I can say whatever it is that I need to say. So yeah, that's the way that I read. And there was another part to that question. Can you repeat that for me in case I didn't cover it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Besides the actual structure, the other part of the question is in regards to word choice. So the actual question, how do you decide on your word choice or descriptions for your poetry?
It's kind of just based on feeling. Sometimes I will go back and try to clarify what I'm saying if I feel like I'm saying something that only makes sense to me. But sometimes I also like to keep that in because it can make the poem or it can be a special part of the poem. So yeah, I guess it depends on what the subject is. It depends on if it's something where I am trying to communicate with a broader audience, or if it's something that's mostly just for me and like this is how I feel like I want to say it at this time.
Okay, makes sense to me. And then going as far as the actual content of the poetry, I think all of you have touched on this at some point, especially Jenise, because you mentioned a lot of emotion and stuff in yours. But do you usually research your poems or do you typically write based off your own knowledge and feelings? So starting again with Lauren.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's sort of half and half. I definitely have poems that are more like family culture centric, and then other poems that are a little bit more broad reaching. So I know that I've had a couple poems that have sort of related to like my academic work that I'm doing. I even had a poem that I did based off of the Chernobyl meltdown. So that was something that was like really research heavy. So I think for me, it's definitely about half and half. Like I like to do some research for poems, but that's definitely not all of the poetry that I do. And I think it's sort of depending upon just like what I'm inspired by or what I come across, or if it's something that I'm drawing from my own personal experience for.
Well, for me, I guess it's the same as Lauren said, it's half and half. Like most of the poems in my book, they're all cultural based. So a lot of the research that was done were finding out how to say things in my language that I didn't know, or researching stories from our tribe to help them connect with what I was trying to say, certain characters and things like that. So there's sometimes I do that if it's a political issue that I wanted more information from that I'm writing about. And other times it basically just comes from my feelings or what I do know. So I guess it just depends on the piece itself and my audience.
Yeah, I agree about it's kind of depending on the piece itself, like what Yulu said. For me, I don't research as much because a lot of my poetry is autobiographical. It's just me kind of sharing. But in my book, the last piece is called Heath Ledger, and it's like a letter that I wrote to Heath Ledger. And so I did research on like what his full name is, about his family and things like that, because I wanted, just personally, that's how I am. I like to research and I like to get information, but I wanted to have the facts about him as I crafted the poem. There's also a poem about Corinne Gaines, who is a young woman from Baltimore, Maryland, who was killed by police officers. And I'm from Baltimore, so when that situation happened, it hit very close to me. She had a young son, and I was pregnant with my son at the time. So I did research about that, about the situation and things that were said and how everything went, to be able to communicate not only like my feelings about the situation, but just kind of the climate, the social climate at that time. So yeah, again, mostly not so much research, but when it's a specific topic and it's really necessary, I think it's important to do that and make sure you have the correct information.
Okay, great. So then kind of transitioning from how, you guys naturally do things while writing poetry and everything. My next question for you is, what are some challenges in writing poetry? So I'm sure some stuff has popped up, especially with everyone getting published and everything. So what is, things that kind of get in your way while writing poetry?
Yeah, so I'd say probably the first would be imposter syndrome, just like feeling like you're not a good enough writer, which I know that like, I mean, you can talk to any writer at any moment and like nobody's going to say like they're, the best writer or they feel that they are 100% ready to be published and writing something. That would be probably the big one. And then I think in terms of poetry, I mean, unless like sort of what Yulu was talking about, you're writing like an epic poem and you have a lot of scope. For some of the other poems, you don't have too much space. So I feel like there's a little bit more pressure on sort of coming up with like the perfect line or perfect rhythm or wording. And so I think it's a little bit of a different beast than fiction. In prose, you sort of have the ability to write a little bit more and be a little bit more wordy. In poetry, you have to be a little bit more specific. So I think sort of honing that self-editing is something that just comes with practice, definitely.
Going off of what Lauren said, I mean, definitely I agree when it comes to the imposter syndrome. I mean, I look at people that come before me and I'm like, really? Like when my book came out and they said that I won the award for it, and I was just like, are you sure you're talking to me? Because there's other people that are more qualified. But I think for me, the most challenging part is knowing your audience, because as we all know as poets, it's a craft that's kind of like dying out. The written word is dying out. And so it's trying to find ways to get people to be interested in what you're doing. And so I have found through spoken word that it's a way for me to be able to get my poetry out there and get people interested in listening to it and making videos. So not just writing things on paper, but having other avenues where people, in the age of TikTok and Instagram and all that, they're able to listen to what you're trying to say versus reading it in a book, because they're not interested in doing that anymore.
Yeah, and to go off of what Yulu is saying, as far as like just the age that we're in right now with wanting to keep people's attention and keep them engaged, a big issue that I find is knowing when to stop, because I am very wordy. And so it's like I want to get it all out and I want to say all the things. It's like without having that structure, because I'm doing free forms, like when does the poem stop? And so you go back and you edit it, and it's like, oh, it needs more. Oh, I take this out. Oh, I put it back. Oh, I changed this around. And so it's being your own writer, being your own editor, being your own first audience, like all of those things, which also would tie into the imposter syndrome that Lauren was talking about, just making the poem, just figuring out what it is that's so hard when there's no example or no model to go off of.
I don't know if I can cut back in, but I just wanted to go off what Jenise said when she said that when to stop the poem. It's so sometimes it's like trying to figure out like where to start. Sometimes my poems start in the middle, and then I realize that that's not where I really want to start the piece. So it's just like kind of knowing, like, did you say all you want to say, or did you say too much? And sometimes that can, sometimes I look down, I finish writing, and I have like 8 pages of one piece that I'm like, people aren't going to be interested in reading 8 pages. I need to hone this down to at least 2, so I totally get where she's coming from.
All right, cool. Well, then going off of challenges, I think the next thing, since we're kind of tilting towards kind of, area of advice for prospective poets, prospective professional published poets, I guess the way to put that. Where would you tell fellow poets to start if their goal is to become published?
Oh, that's such a good question. I feel like probably like my biggest bit of advice would just be like to read contemporary poetry, like try to stay as up to date in terms of what contemporary poets are doing. Like I know a lot of the times, let's say you haven't really done a lot of work on your own in poetry, you're reading very like canon centric like historical poets who've been publishing, and they published, you know, in the 1800s or whatever, and that isn't necessarily what contemporary publishing for poetry is. So that would be my major thing. It's just like read as much as you can from contemporary poets.
That is so true. I Lauren, like I think reading it's knowing your craft. I mean, if you're going to be a novelist, you want to read novels because you want to know how people do things. So if you're going to be a poet, you want to read poetry. I think I would say that poets need to, especially new poets, is don't be don't be scared to look up open mic nights or go and listen to new poets, read their work, look at poetry contests or literary magazines and see what they're publishing. And then if you want to get published, that should be your first stop, is getting published in a magazine, because they're going to tell you, a lot of magazines, when if they do reject you, are going to tell you, this is not what I'm looking for, but this is what I'm looking for. So it kind of gives you that critique, that criticism you need to move forward, and to not to give up, because it's hard as it is as a poet to publish books itself. So, you know, being published in magazines and literary journals, academic journals is a big plus. So just don't give up when you get that rejection. Just keep moving forward, because you're going to find somebody that's going to look at your work and say that it's good and that they want to publish it.
And I want to tie in what you both said, with both Lauren and you said, as far as for me personally, because I'm self-published, I don't have the experience of going through being like traditionally published. But even with self-publishing, it's important to read the contemporary poets, read the books that are out there, not just so that you have an awareness of like what's current and that you experience different voices, but so you can also see, like you can physically see the structure and see, okay, well, if this is how the poets are doing their books, and this is, you know, different examples of poetry books, like what would that look like to me, and what does my voice look like? And going off of what Yulu said about like going to open mics and hearing different voices, when I was going to open mics, people would give you chat books, and it would just be like they printed it at home, or they printed it at Staples, and it was like you hear them on stage and you hear these words, and it's like, I made this, like here's my book. So it's about like just getting out there, getting what's the word that I'm looking for? Being exposed to different poetry and being exposed to different books. And since we are in like the social media age, when you find people who are sharing poetry and sharing words that you enjoy, like go to their website, go check their links, because a lot of them have books that they're not necessarily saying like, hey, get my book, get my book, get my book. But it's important to like support those artists and be able to like see and hear their words in a different way and see how that resonates with you as well.
Cool. And Jenise, was the word you were trying to think of networking?
No, the word that I was looking for was like getting exposure. So being exposed to different things, but networking is also important. That's another good point that I think that we didn't so much touch on, is getting to know other people in the community, networking and being able to learn from them. That's a good point.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, and you guys are already talking about reading other poetry and things like that. So to jump off of that, my next question is, what poets would you recommend new writers read to gain a better grasp on poetry and poetry techniques? And I mean, maybe if you know specifically a poet who's especially known for a certain technique or something, or just who you would personally, you think, recommend to give someone a good idea.
Yeah, so one of the things, and this was kind of something that I was thought of with the last question, actually leads perfectly into this, but I would say one of the things that I always recommend is signing up for poets.org's poem a day. I don't know if any of you have heard it, but it's just like one poem a day that just gets sent to you by email like every day. So that's one of the ways that I start my morning, is like I wake up and there's like a new poem in my box, and I, read it. Some of the time, I think it's amazing and fantastic. Other times it's not necessarily something I'm drawn to, but it's just a really good way to be constantly flooded by some contemporary poetry. So one thing that I would say is look into that. And then a couple of poets that I just continue to come back to. Ada Limon, Ocean Vuong. I'm just like, I know that that's definitely one of the names that I consistently recommend. I'm trying to think of who else. Yeah, I'd probably say those are the two big ones that I can think of right now. But yeah, there's lots of great contemporary poets out there.
And if you want to look at poetry through technique, you want to read like the classics, you know. So you're gonna look at Ezra Pound. Probably want to look at Shakespeare. I mean, there's so many great. You Google, you know, classic poets and look at them, because these are all the poets that created the technique and the forms, and then they're the people that are going to teach you, oh, this is how you write a sonnet. Oh, this is how I write blah blah blah. This is what dictation is. This is diameter. You know, these are the people that teach you that. Contemporary poets, a lot of them, at least the ones that I read, don't really follow a lot of technique. So your best bet would to like you know, Lauren said, go to poets.org, or you know, see if you can sign up for a poetry class at your local community college. Sometimes they have them online for cheap. You can find those there too. But trying to find something where you can learn the basics. Take a 101 poetry class. It will tell you how about techniques, because if you want to be a poet, then you need to know all there is to know about your craft.
Some poets I would recommend would be Susie Q. Smith. She was involved with was it NPS, National Poetry Society. We're not doing slams and stuff like that traditionally anymore, but she's a writer that I really respect and admire, and she's good with structure and teaching workshops. Also would recommend the poetry of Jenise Smith. He follows some structure. He also does some free form, but he also has a different voice. So it's nice to see the way he expresses himself through these traditional poems, just marrying the traditional and the contemporary. And the last person whose name came to me was Lyd Havens. Lyd is also someone that I would recommend. And usually around this time, Lyd puts out some prompts for people to practice different techniques and just to practice different writings. So that's also something to look for, especially, you know, during National Poetry Writing Month. There's usually poets who are offering up different prompts, or saying like, for my 30th 30, today I wrote a villanelle, and then you can see their examples. So again, yeah, those are the ones that I recommend. Just keeping your eyes open for anything that crosses your social media or any opportunity to learn more.
Okay, awesome. And then keeping it going for specific poets, we've already gone through my whole list of questions pretty much. So final question here, on more personal note, is what is your favorite, or sorry, who is your favorite living poet? And also, if you've got one of each, then who is your favorite poet that has already passed?
Okay, so I'll go with the one who's passed first. And I would say Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Like, I study Victorian literature and you know, some older literature in terms of my own specific like academic degrees and things like that. And honestly, like, her love poetry is just fantastic. So like, if you're looking for something very emotion heavy but in a more traditional form, I would look into Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And then probably one of my favorite living poets is Elizabeth Acevedo, who's an Afro-Latinx poet who's currently working. And she does actually novels in verse. So like, I just love novels in verse, but she's also writing in specifically YA, so young adult novels. And they're really, really emotion heavy, but also very grounded in like culturally specific plot and characters in a really authentic way. So I would definitely recommend both of them.
I think I'm going to go in the same order that Lauren did. My favorite poet that has passed, and the one who basically paved the way for me to even write, like I said, reading poetry that wasn't children's poetry, is Maya Angelou. Her book just changed how I felt about the world. She gave women of voice. I felt that in a world where women are mostly silenced, and she is an inspiration to a lot of my activism poetry is because of her and what she represented. So she paved the way for a lot of my work. And then, so my favorite living poet is one who I mentioned before is Joy Harjo. She is a Muskogee Creek poet, and she's really popular in the Native American world. Her poetry, and I said, just opened up my eyes to being able to use poetry that was powerful to, in regards to what was going on in my world and what tribal nations were going through, reservations and just Native people in general. And she does spoken word. She actually sings her poetry. She's in a band. So just a lot of the stuff that she does is the stuff that I piggyback off of, and I'm like, oh, I can do that too. Oh, wow, that's so great. And so I was able to sit in a couple of her classes when she taught at UCLA. And I was just completely just in awe of her work. And she's if you're looking for somebody that can just teach you about what goes on and culturally, these are the two people that I would totally recommend.
I also love Maya Angelou. That was also like a very early introduction into poetry for me. And I was thinking about this question. I was like, there's somebody whose name is not coming to me. So I'm with you on that one, Yulu. I also really love the work of Khalil Gibran. So that's work that I really enjoy reading. As far as living poets, this one's really hard for me because I know a lot of poets, and so I'm trying to think of like whose work do I enjoy, not just them personally. But I really love Saul Williams. He is a poet. He's a singer-songwriter. He's an actor. His poetry is very heavy in activism, and I love his voice. I love his style. I didn't even know he was a singer. I bought one of his albums thinking it was a poetry album, and it was like rock music, but there were also poems on there. And so I kind of got that, like the music and the lyricism and the words together. And so, yeah, he'd definitely be my favorite living poet right now.
Awesome. Well, that's all I've got. Thank you all very much. I think I'll give everyone the opportunity now to plug any books or list out any social media handles you've got. We can just go in the same order.
Sure. So I actually just had a short story anthology, which is right here. When other people saw us, they saw the dead. It's a gothic horror anthology featuring all BIPOC voices. I was the editor for that, and it just released back in May from Haunt Publishing. And I have a few other Latinx short story anthologies releasing in October, I believe. So take a look at those, and you can find me on social media. On my Twitter handle is at Lauren Gilmore 03, and on Instagram at Lauren T. Davila.
Well, thank you, Lauren. I'm going to have to look into that because I really like Gothic. That's like one of my things. I write that too. So I'm really interested in looking into that book. My book that just released in January is Ope. I don't have my background up, so you can't see it, but it's apostrophe OPE, and you can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. And if you want, you can find me on Facebook, Yulu Ewis, YULU space EWIS. I have Yulu Ewis, the author. You can find me there on Instagram and also on Twitter. And or you can email me at yuluewis@gmail.com. If you have any questions, if you want to get a book from me myself or signed, I will send you one out myself. So yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to me speak today.
Yeah, and I have my book Brave, which is available on Amazon. I also have another book that's available called Whoa that I'm very excited about. I haven't really announced it yet, but you can also get that on Amazon. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Jenise Michele. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much for showing up today and answering all my questions. I appreciate it very much.